Hello everyone, my name is Kiera. We are all aware of the great impact that the internet has had on our lives nowadays. It has changed my life dramatically as well. I want to tell you now about the most awful truth that was revealed to me on the internet. I was born into a family of two amazing historians and archaeologists who were really into their work. We've always lived out of suitcases and trunks because my parents took part in excavations all over the world. It was amazing to move from one ancient cultural place to another and to learn about new people, their culture, their language, and their history. Of course, it was hard to get used to a new home, school, and lifestyle. And deep inside, I hoped we would settle somewhere one day. And besides, I never had those normal things that most kids my age had and used every day. We never had a TV or the internet. In some places, we couldn't even use our phones because there was no service. But it never actually bothered me much. I always used to think that I had a very happy childhood, but everything changed one day. We lived in a small village in India, and my parents were working day and night. They would leave early in the morning and come back home very late. Once my mother came back home alone. She looked really worried and nervous, and she told me that my dad had set off on an extremely important business trip, and that she would have to join him soon, and that I couldn't go with them. I was going to be staying with my grandparents. She said we were leaving immediately and that I had to go pack as quickly as I could. Shock didn't even begin to describe it all. Nothing like that had ever happened before. We flew out on a red-eye to Austin, the city where my grandma and grandpa lived. Sure, I was excited to see my grandparents, but even though my mom had tried to persuade me that everything was okay, I still had some worries. I had a wonderful time at Grandma and Grandpa's, but my mom literally left the same day that we had arrived. She promised that they would come for me in 2 weeks, but it never happened. My grandparents told me that Mom and Dad had to work on something really important, and they would be coming a little later than they had expected. And also my grandma said that my parents' business trip was not a reason for me to lie around all day. She told me that my parents had wanted me to go to boarding school. That was really frightening. I have never gone to a big modern school in a big American city, but I tried to persuade myself that it was just going to be a new gripping experience. So I waved goodbye and set off for boarding school. It turned out to be so unusual and strange at first. The school was enormous, and there were electronic displays everywhere. All my classmates were always staring at their phones or discussing subjects that I couldn't even have a conversation about. I would often hear giggles behind my back when I tried to study on the computer in the library, or when I asked some stupid questions about the things that are pretty common in the modern world. I wish they would ask about African tribal customs or ask me to speak Mandarin Chinese. The only person I managed to make friends with was Olivia, my roommate. She was so amazed by the fact that I'd spent my whole life away from the civilized world. She would ask me questions all night long, to the point that we both were sleepy before our lessons the next day. But she also tried to get me involved in everything that was going on at school, and to make me more modern. She helped me with all the devices and told me which was more important. She even taught me how to use the internet. My parents have always been pretty conservative and told me that there was nothing special about it. They encouraged me to read books instead, but I felt like a completely new world had opened up for me. I could look up any information there to learn anything that I wanted. I started to spend a lot of time on the internet. I made new friends and became part of my school community. Time was going by, but I still had not heard from my parents. I never even spoke to Olivia about them until it was time for our holiday break. She told me she was going to spend her holidays in the mountains with her parents and asked me, "Where are you going, Kiera? Where are your mom and dad going to take you this time?" I burst into tears and told her the whole story, but Olivia didn't seem to be discouraged. She said, "Come on, we've got the internet. If your parents are famous archaeologists, we can easily find them. Let's look it up there." So we went to the library and started the search, and it didn't take long. We managed to find tons of articles about the projects my parents had worked on previously, but there was no information about what they were doing now. But then I came across some forum where archaeologists were discussing a bunch of possible issues, professional or otherwise, and there were Mom and Dad's accounts there as well, but for some reason they were blocked. I kept searching, and finally I found a theme where archaeologists were discussing a recent incident of theft in India. I clicked on the link with a shaking hand and saw my parents' pictures. The words theft, ancient relics, and arrested occurred in every message. My parents, my mom and dad, were not on an incredibly important business trip. They were in prison because they had stolen some ancient Indian relics. I could hardly believe my eyes. Olivia was sitting next to me, stunned. It took me some time to start breathing again, to make myself stand up and call my grandma. My grandparents knew from day one what had happened, from the day of my father's arrest. It was my grandma who insisted on my coming to Austin. Soon after, my mom was arrested as an accomplice as well. Grandma persuaded her not to tell me the bitter truth for as long as possible. And it was so painful, because the only thing I wanted was to see my parents again. I begged my grandparents to let me visit them, and after a little while they agreed. It was so awkward to see my mom and dad wearing those orange suits, and to not be able to take their hands and get them out of that horrible place. There were a lot of tears, apologies, and remorse, and there was nothing we could do but wait. 5 years for my dad and 3 years for my mom. I will be an adult by that time. I have to admit that I was really angry with my parents at first. I would never have expected them to do anything like this. They destroyed their own lives and mine too. It took me a lot of time to find the strength to forgive them. It's been almost 3 years now, and I'm looking forward to seeing my dear mother again. I know it's going to be hard for her, for all of us, but we have to pay for our mistakes and to be held responsible for the things we do. Have your parents ever made an unjustifiable mistake? Have you forgiven them? I would also be happy to read your stories. It would be great to know if you've watched this video and know mine. We all need to stick together and to stay strong for ourselves and our family.